Welcome, Jesper.
Thank you.
Jesper With-Fogstrup, CEO of Moneypenny. Really glad to have you here. I got to know you as an innovator, but an innovator that is well aware of basically the great tradition that your company has in customer conversations. And maybe let me just quickly start with a little story. I was at another conference last week, and I talked to a big enterprise, international enterprise, and a leader in their conversational AI area, and he has been doing this for 6-7 years. And he said, well, like we have now laid all the necessary foundations, we have a perfect technological setup, but to be honest, what I'm interested in for the next phase is what actually makes a good conversation. What is it? And so I'm very glad that you're here, because I think we'll go into that topic, and I think you have a lot to share about that one. So let me jump in. Let me just quickly look at all the questions that I prepared for today. One moment. Yeah. So I think we heard a lot yesterday. We're going to hear a lot today. AI capabilities are really advancing fast. And in your experience, what actually determines whether an AI system works in production?
Well, really, like at its core, is it successful? Is it doing what you intended it to do without sort of hallucinating or going elsewhere than you didn't? And how do you, if it's something that's conversing with customers, the clients, is it not doing brand damage to you? I guess that's very key. But more than anything, it was interesting to sort of hear Cherries at Microsoft, right? It's true, there is a CFO in every organization, and ultimately they want an outcome of that investment they're making. And we are thinking about it as, how do we make sure that we use our heritage in managing conversations, of which we've handled more than 180 million over the last 25 years. So we claim some understanding of what makes a good conversation. And we do that for more than 15,000 clients sort of across the UK and US. And when we think about introducing, whether it be human, people, AI, or a combination, a blend of the two, it's about finding out what does the client really need for that conversation. As an example, we may get onto that sort of how we got to where we are, but a lot of times clients think that they know what they want, and then we implement that for them, and then they go, actually that doesn't have the outcome we want. It's like, well, we told you it was going to be very different. So both, it has to be a great sort of customer or client, or in our case, if it's a voice-based interaction, a caller experience, but it also have to deliver the financial results that you sort of anticipate as you invest into the technology.
Very good, thank you. I think this point that you were making, that the importance of getting the conversation right. Also, like this is something I always try to tell people, that whether it's a human conversation, whether it's an AI-based conversation, it's crucial when you are going into a one-on-one interaction that you get that right. And now, I think what's really great about you is that you have so much data to work with, and you've now analyzed more than 180 million customer conversations. So when you look at this wealth of data, what did it tell you about this balance that you already hinted at, like where AI performs best and where human judgment is still necessary, or is actually the best?
Yeah, I don't think it's either or. I think the combination, that blended experience, is probably the best one. And I'll give you an example. We had a estate agent or a realtor client that were very keen that they wanted just to take cost out of their business. And if that's your prime objective, first of all, don't come to us necessarily, because we'll make it more efficient for you, but we'll also really focused on doing the right thing for your brand and for your customers. So this particular agent, excuse me, real estate agent, sent all the traffic to our AI agent, and very quickly people disconnected, as in they didn't want to speak to the agent, they wanted to speak to somebody. And we had a high abandonment rate of people that didn't want to either engage with the agent, showed frustration, or essentially did the equivalent of pressing 0 crazy on your IVR sort of thing, yelling down the phone, I want to speak to a representative, I want to speak to a human. So we sat down with them and said, okay, let's look at the data here. We sort of knew that this was going to happen, but now we have data. So we slashed sort of escalations from 66 to 6% by thinking about what was the actual intention of engaging for the purpose that the caller was making. So as an example, if you're an estate agent, probably one of your most valuable calls is somebody saying, I want to sell my house. So do you want to send that to an AI agent? Probably not. That's probably where you want to experiment less. On the other hand, my shower or my bathroom is leaking for a tenant. Okay, that's probably somewhere in the middle. At the very end is, I want to rent a house, and there's so many people that want to rent properties versus how many properties there are available, and we can help to score by doing the right thing and asking the right questions, scoring how likely are this tenant to be appropriate for this property. So that's looking at the different use cases and applying the right technology to it. I think in some industries, there's a real sort of sprint to cost cut at the moment, and the likelihood is that actually saving money is the most expensive thing you can do right now if you don't think about the intention and the potential outcome of it.
Yeah, beautiful. I love this point. You know, also, I think what people also underestimate is that we have really advanced technology at our disposal right now, but go 5 years back and the technology was far from perfect. And you really needed to understand what it takes to create a good bot conversation. And I think, you know, what you also described, this is a really good point, that we've actually been trained to get out of these conversations as quickly as possible. You know, because we moved from the typing to something that was even worse, namely, like, you know, a voice that tells us, I'm sorry, I didn't get that, or like, you know, an infinite loop where you don't even get out of it anymore. And the main thing that we learned is to shout, get me to a human representative, right? And people still underestimate that even with the most advanced technology, you have only a small window where you can convince your customer that, you know, this is not one of these dumb bots, but this is one that actually works. And so let me move on to the next question, because this really links to that. So we've also talked, you know, when we prepared for this, about how voice and personality matter in customer interactions. And I'd love for you to share an example where basically, you know, preserving these human elements made a real difference when you introduced AI technologies.
Yeah, I think there's so many questions, really. So many examples. I mean, one of the use cases we do a lot of in our US business is people pressing emergency buttons in elevators. And if you've ever been stuck in an elevator, you probably don't want to be there for too long, and your anxiety level is probably pretty high. So speed of response is really important. So hitting that button, having somebody respond real quick is important, but it's probably not the sort of an automated, at risk, that conversation that might go around in circles because your anxiety levels is so high, you don't really know how to respond to questions. We need to get that to a human pretty fast so they can calm you down. Other examples are just using technology that's available. We have, not long from here actually, in Glasgow, we have a beautician that originates from South Africa. And she was very keen when she moved from the phone ringing off the hook and couldn't get to it. And she was doing facials, and her team were doing whatever a beautician or a spa is doing. She's very clear that she didn't want to lose that personal touch. So we cloned her voice, and when you call them now, or call her Salon or Spar now, it's her who answers the phone, but it's an AI agent. We obviously disclose it's an AI agent, but it brings sort of another less frictionless conversation to the customer. So I think there's different use cases, whether it be for optimizing leads that we do a lot of and qualified sort of digital campaigns, or whether it be very anxiety-driven sort of more emergency situations, or whether it be in healthcare, legal intake, a whole bunch of different sort of areas that we deal with. It is very important, but I think the most important thing is really realizing when is AI capacity or capability sort of come to a halt. When does the customer do the equivalent, actually before the customer do the equivalent and ask for a representative, when do they show that frustration with, if they do have frustration, and we get them to a human. And a lot of our frenemies or sort of logos that's doing AI voice agents out there are sort of doing the equivalent of throwing the call over the fence to the client directly, and then the client has to start the conversation all over again. We're very keen that when that conversation needs to get escalated in the rare occurrence, like 6% that I just talked to, that it gets to a Moneypenny PA, the person that answers the phone, and that PA gets a very succinct summary on our proprietary telephony platform of what happened during the call and why did it escalate. So was it frustration? Was it by design that we wanted it to speak to a human, or whatever else? And the conversation could just seamlessly be picked up by the human and considered. That's focus on the customer, opposed to try and drive cost out of your business by deploying sort of sub-optimal tech-only solution.
Yeah, I really also like that point, and you made it at the very beginning. You know that it's in my eyes also actually quite dangerous to focus solely on the cost cutting motive. You know, because what a lot of people underestimate is when you create experiences, when you create good experiences, what is the value of actually keeping your customers, right? Because one really bad experience, and we saw yesterday that probably in Japan it's you're losing your customers most quickly, but also I would say like in any other country, like one really bad experience is enough, so your customers are gone for good. But also like a really, really great experience keeps them and makes them promote your brand. And I think one thing that I would encourage every one of you to think about is, how do you actually uncover that in the data? Because, you know, like your top management needs to see this in numbers, but it's very hard to link that to numbers. You know what it means to actually retain customers, the customer lifetime value, and so on.
Yeah. There wasn't a question there, but let me comment on that. Yeah, I think it can be. It sort of depends on what data do you have and what are you getting from your partners. We very sort of have an open book in. We'll share data on the back of how your agent is performing, whether it's a human PA or whether it's an AI agent. And if you share with us what the outcome is of the conversation, like the most simple thing is like, we just want conversion of leads that we're throwing in. How many of them are converting, multiplied by the value of that? Well, there you go, that's your income. And suddenly our service moves from being a cost line to a revenue driver, and we're increasingly seeing our customers being that. And it's a much better conversation to have, rather than sort of running to the bottom of the cost, rather than and driving incremental growth. And I think we love to see our clients where we drive growth for them and where they publicly talk about it. One of the sort of most pleasant things I woke up to this morning was like a large Skoda dealership this morning. They posted on their LinkedIn profile that they were so excited about bringing Moneypenny's AI agent to Fur. And this is not a sales pitch, this is just my happy sort of morning I'm sharing. And said, like, we're now seeing increased customer satisfaction up by X, I forget how much it was. We're booking appointments faster by Y, and our revenue are up by C, right? That's a great mentality of thinking about how do you using technology to enable your business, and how is that quantifiable, rather than think about how do I take another 10, 20, 50,000 pounds or dollars out of my business.
Very nice, beautiful. So let's maybe take, Caroline, we have how much left? 5 minutes, that's beautiful. And we have like...
luxury.
It's perfect. So we can dive a little bit into, like real, like the real productive setup. So you launched your AI Receptionist in beta before you really rolled it out widely. And what would you say, Jesper, why was that that step so important?
Well, I don't know that anybody should be rolling anything out and just hoping. I mean, I often say to my team that hope is my least favorite strategy. So probably better to find a safe environment or sandpit where we can test it and see if it drives real value to the point that we just talked about. So we actually started building, well, actually let's step back. So our architecture behind the AI agent is quite modular. It's using different models. It's using different partners to deliver text-to-speech and speech-to-text and other sort of vector database infrastructure and whatnot. So initially we designed the model and the agent to handle text-based conversations, so very apt to the sort of chatbot consumer expectation of that. And I joined the business about 1.5 years ago and tried to, and at that time the team had already pivoted to more of a voice-based interaction that's closer to our core. So we doubled down on that, and I got to say our CTO was very persistent. We're going to get there, and I had times of the spring of last year, actually around this time last year, I was like, we need a plan B sort of thing. I don't know if this is going to work out. But Pete was absolutely adamant that we were going to get there, and credit to him and the team, they absolutely did. So we put it into beta sort of late spring, early summer last year, and when I look back at that experience, it was suboptimal to what it is now. Another way of putting that could be it was sort of terrible versus the great product that we have out in the market now. And it was terrible because it was more of a very respectful conversation like you and I are having right now. Nobody's interrupting each other except you just said yes a moment ago, and they would have stopped the agent, right? And the agent would have gone like, oh, now I'm waiting for my next instruction. Now the agent is not doing that. It's providing sort of a more human-like, consumer-grade conversation where we accept that people are going to have verbal nods and interrupting each other and that sort of thing. What we also found was that the agent was hallucinating. And a good example, let me use sort of similar example to the one before around an estate agent. Typical conversation would be, I want to view a property. Great, which one is it? It's the one with the red door down on Oxford Road. And the agent would go, okay. The red one on Oxford Road, is that number 4? There's £585,000. And you go like, yes, I'd like to view it. When would you like to view it? On Saturday morning. Saturday morning, that's great. We'll see you then. Like, that is not going to happen, right? That's the agent hallucinating. So we had to step back and say, how do we break down those big prompts into much smaller prompts, and how do we put guardrails around it to make sure that that's a great customer experience? So instead of just going, yeah, see you, we get, okay, it's 10 a.m., you're going to meet this person, this is where we're going to meet. And we file patents for that proprietary layer of technology we build on top of it to almost lock down that conversation or prevent sort of brand damage or a bad consumer experience to happen. So that took us some time, and in October we went to commercial launch. We had a sizable beta, sort of double digits, and none of those clients that was in our beta did not convert to a commercial client, and I have never been part of a beta like that before. And that was a product of trust, of a feedback loop, of listening to our clients, making sure that they got what they wanted, also stepping back and go, actually, this is not working. We had one client that where they, from leadership, it was, we want this to be really cost effective. The actual operation just said, when you get to the agent, just say human, please, because we want to speak to all of you. So we had these weird data points that we needed to learn from as well. So there was curveballs as well. But it was really important that to get to the great product that we took to commercial launch, that we had that beta period, and it was very iterative. And we looked after, of course, after those beta clients and make sure they had a cost-effective way as well.
Very good. Well, very impressive, and thanks so much, Jesper. I think I could go on now for 1 hour at least. even more. Maybe you too. I think it's a very interesting, very nice conversation. Unfortunately, we have to stop at this point, but it was such a pleasure to have you. And let me just say this to the audience. I think if there's one thing you should take away from this conference this year is flip or change from a cost-cutting mindset to a growth mindset. You know, I think this was a really great point you made, and I really like to encourage companies to say, you know, when you talk about the application of AI systems inside of your companies, you know, there's two ways to do it. One way is to basically announce publicly without talking to your team, I'm going to cut this and this much jobs. The other thing is to go to your team saying, you are a wonderful team. We have achieved great things in the last years. Now there's new superpowers at our disposal. Let's put our heads together and think how we can best use them to explode the size of the cake. You can explode the size of the cake. Profit equation has two sides. Revenue minus cost. Don't only think about costs. There's another side too. Don't forget that side. Thank you so much for making that so nice and obvious, Jesper. It's great to have you here. Big round of applause for Jesper. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.